The only purpose of dyes is it's cosmetic. So they are basically makeup for our food and medications.
Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Kevin Connors. Welcome to another episode of Connors Clinic Live. Today I have some special guests who just are putting out a wonderful documentary, dyes and the effect of dyes in your health, causing cancer, causing hyperactivity, causing brain issues, brain inflammation, all sorts of things. I'm going to let them do most of the talking. It's Brandon and Whitney Cawood, and I'm going to have you just jump right in, introduce yourself, tell us why would you do a documentary on this? Tell your story.
All right, so I'm Whitney Cawood, and this is Brandon. He's my husband. So I have a background in education, and after I decided to quit teaching, I went into marketing, and we started to have children. And after we had our first son, between the ages of, or our only son, we have a daughter, between the ages of 1 and 3, he was like a bit of a puzzle. His behavior was kind of erratic in that some days, most days were really rough with the tantrums and the fits and the hyper and the just like inability to cope just with everyday emotion, which, I mean, if you've had a young child, you know that that can be normal, but the amount of times we were having fits and aggression and hitting a day, it was a lot. So we were having trouble at daycare, we were having trouble at church, we were all the things, and we decided to do an elimination diet. We eliminated wheat, dairy, and synthetic dyes. And once we eliminated those, we saw like just a dramatic difference in our child. And so it was pretty shocking. We reintroduced wheat and we saw no effect. We reintroduced dairy and we saw no effect. And when we reintroduced dyes, it was within 15 minutes, the fits and the hitting and the aggression, it just came flooding back. And so that kind of sparked our curiosity about synthetic dyes. And I was really curious about what was going on in the brain and if it could affect other areas of our life, if it could be, causing cancer or causing colitis or any other issues. So I decided to kind of dig into the research, and I was really confused. Even reading the abstract was confusing to me. So I really wanted to interview the experts and ask the questions that I had. So I asked Brandon if he wanted to document our journey as I just tried to figure out and get to the bottom of synthetic dyes, and he agreed. So
we embarked on that journey. I have a background in my day-to-day. I am a commercial photographer and videographer. I do, advertising work and things like that for businesses. And so we had never taken on doing like a long-form video project. So that was new. But as far as like creating videos and things like that, that's what I do every single day. So she had to convince me a little bit because, we knew it was going to be I knew it was going to be a lot of work. I had no idea how much work it was going to be. After 2.5 years, we're finally done. But we embarked on that journey, and it started off slow. We didn't know who we were going to get to be in the film. And luckily, door after door was open. God opened a lot of doors for us. He introduced us to the right people. And so we ended up, the Center for Science and the Public Interest is a big part of our film. And we went to Europe and interviewed Dr. Jim Stevenson, who is responsible for the study that is why the European Union has a warning label on dyes. And so we really got, the best people in the world to kind of back up this information. And then our documentary is also about 50% story-based. So we interviewed affected families across the country, and we hear their stories, and then we have the science in the film that kind of backs up what they're saying, what they're talking about. Kind of, a lot of times you have an issue like this that's not super well known. People kind of think you might be a little kooky or a little crunchy, but we've got the researchers and the studies and the science in the film to back it all up.
Well, and you would probably be interested in the beginning of our journey. The reason why I wanted to embark on an elimination diet is because I have a lot of autoimmune issues, and I realized once I completely changed my diet, almost all of my issues went away. And so I knew the power that finding foods that were harmful to me and my body, and that everybody's body is different and unique. I knew that it could make a difference. And it's not a cure-all for everyone, but it really significantly helped me relieve, my symptoms. So we were really shocked that it was dyes, because we were really expecting it to, the dairy and the wheat to have more an effect because he was eating it so much. And I think one of the most shocking parts about our journey is that synthetic dyes were not something that he was getting regularly. We weren't doing the sugary cereals or the Pop-Tarts or the sweet treats every day. Like, he really was just getting it daily through an allergy medication. He had chronic ear infections, so he was on antibiotics, and he was on a daily allergy medicine and Benadryl to clear up any kind of fluid that was in his ears. And so like, we were really shocked that just taking that away, and then the occasional like birthday parties, we would swap out treats at birthday parties, but we were really shocked that it made that big of a difference. And fast forward now, he's in first grade. So we have a wonderful public school. He's in a STEM school, and he's doing German immersion, and from pre-K all the way through first grade, we haven't had any issues. We haven't had a single meltdown. We haven't had the hitting or the fits. He's just thriving. And so for him, it was a 180 flip. Like, it completely took care of any issues that we were having. And before that, we had actually been asked to leave his mother's morning out. So like, things were, which is like a half day daycare. So things were really rough at church, at home, and at school. And then now things are just so much better, which that's not everyone's story. Once again, that he is unique in that he reacts more strongly to synthetic dyes than most children. But there are those children. And in this journey, we started a group right around the time we decided to start a documentary. We started a group that's grown from 0 to 580,000.
Almost 590 now.
Almost 590,000. And so we've heard hundreds, if not thousands, of stories that have been so similar to ours, which has been really affirming in that we need more information out there. So that's our story. That's where we're at.
Well, I want to touch on one point you said of, you weren't eating a lot of foods that had a lot of dyes in it that you could identify, but it was his daily medications. They're putting this in medication. So he was taking a Benadryl with maybe a red dye in it or something. That was to clear up the inflammation in his ears, but it was actually causing inflammation. I have a whole course on chronic disease and autoimmune, and one of my main points of that is to find your triggers.
Love it.
And they're different for everybody, and there can be multiple triggers. So anything that's going to stimulate inflammation of the brain is going to be a trigger. So dyes are horrific for that, and especially with kids. And I just want to make a statement that, kids before age 2 to 3 have no blood-brain barrier. So if you're putting something in their body, it is crossing the blood-brain barrier that is non-existent. So the blood-brain barrier made up by the astrocytes of the brain doesn't form until after that time.
Wow.
So toxins from vaccinations, from medications, from foods, whether it be dyes that we're talking about today or some other inflammatory toxin, is going to go into the brain and affect the brain. And it can be, praise God that your son had a 180-degree turnaround, but there's a lot of kids that this can affect them for life. It can lodge in the neurons and can cause demyelinated diseases and all sorts of different problems. But
one of the driving factors for us making this film is the fact that we recognized if we hadn't have figured this out, like, how long would he have gone? It
was painful
with this behavior. He was having trouble making friends. He was having trouble, getting along with his teachers and things like that. So we're like, there's got to be other kids out there whose parents have no idea that dyes are a contributing factor to what's going on with them. And if you spend a whole life consuming dyes and it's affecting you in this way and you don't know it, like, that's crazy. So,
and how would that lead you to feel about yourself as well? Because he was the kid. He was the kid that was an issue, and he kind of knew that. And
even at 3,
how did that feel about you as parents too?
Oh, it was painful.
I mean, parents.
As a mom, I've never been in a darker place, never. And so my mental health was struggling. I felt like a failure, and I've really like to be a prepared person. Like, I read the books. We were eating mostly organic foods, which was ironic. We just did not think about medication. And so I really tried my very best to do all the things and to listen to all the podcasts. And, we were just grasping for straws to figure out like something that could just help him just a little bit, just a little bit, just a little bit. And so once we eliminated the dyes, it really was pretty dramatic in that the fits and stuff stopped right away. But then we still had those occasional like slip ups where we would go camping or something and we wouldn't think about dyes being in marshmallows, or there was a spinach wrap that I had, and I thought that it was green because of the spinach, and it
Right.
had yellow 5 and blue 1. And so we had a really rough week that week because I was giving him, I was making like, I call them egg tacos or egg quesadillas a couple of times a week. And dyes, it's important to note that it stays in your system for a while. And I think everybody processes it at a different time. But for him, for 48 hours after consuming even like one mini marshmallow, he would just have just a really, really rough time. And we tested that one time, actually. I was making like hot chocolate, like homemade hot chocolate for the teachers for Christmas time. I was putting marshmallows on the top, and he saw a marshmallow that fell on the floor, and like an animal ran and grabbed it and put it in his mouth. And I was like, oh no. And I turned it over, and I was like, in a white marshmallow. So it's really permeated a lot of foods you wouldn't expect. We've seen it in canned foods. We've seen it in spices. We have an entire list of just really, really surprising places that you would find it. And it's not always the sugary, colorful cereals or the sugary, colorful treats. It's even permeated like cosmetics and mouthwash.
Schools.
White icing, vanilla icing, chocolate icing. And so you can't really look at a product and see, does this have dyes or not? Really, the only safe bet is if it's organic, then it is innately dye-free, because organic foods cannot be synthetically made, and synthetic dyes.
But not everything, even though it might say organic, not everything is organic in the product.
Yeah, that's a valid point.
So it's, praise God, you guys searched for this. What's the vast majority of Americans do? They run to the doctor, and is the doctor going to go, you should look at dyes, you should look at your diet? No, they're saying, we're going to give your kid a label so then it excuses you from being a bad parent. And then
I'm glad you said that. That was our story.
Yes.
That was our story. We would go to the doctor and try to get help. We
did behavior therapy. All the pediatricians never even brought up diet or food, like what we were eating. It was always, they wanted to get him evaluated and things like that. And so we tried to, we have pushed back on the evaluation because he was 3 years old. We knew
and the doctors agreed with us at the time. If this continues until he's 6, like they said, you can go ahead and get an evaluation and get started, or you can wait till he's 6, because some of these behaviors are quote unquote normal until you're 6. And so that really was the suggestion that we had.
But once we figured it out, and on this journey, we've actually, we brought this information to most of his pediatricians. They had no idea, and so it's been interesting to, as just a regular person, you assume that your doctors know everything. You assume that they know everything that there is to know about health, and so it's kind of been interesting to see that it's not something that's super.
I'm glad that enlightenment hit you. Because I've been doing this for a long time and hear from cancer patients all the time of that, diet has nothing to do with it. It's insane. It's insanity. Because it defies common sense, right?
Right.
Any thinking person would go, is there a reason for this? Let's figure that out. So hats off to you guys for digging into that. I know you love your child, but there's a lot of people that really love their children who don't do this, So to get this information out is crucial.
Thank you.
We also realized too in our journey, like a lot of the medications for, like the, things like ADHD and things like that. And a lot of times children or people with those, the medications to treat that a lot of times also have dyes, and people with ADHD, and even our son is on the gifted spectrum. We've noticed that, we've noticed a lot of like the neurodivergent like spectrum of people, like they tend to have a stronger reaction. And so a lot of those medications for those things have dye in them as well. We had somebody also epilepsy. We had a person in our group write us about their child that had epilepsy, and you can't not take your epilepsy medication. But she had actually had a physical allergic reaction to Red 40. So she couldn't take, there was two options, one with Red 40 and the other one is Red 3. And so she's having to take medication with Red 3 in it every single day, because to get it compounded would cost her, $1,000 a month. And
she made note that they can't afford $1,000 medication without her getting a second job.
Right.
Which is, I mean, you think about that. It's going to cost her time with her children, even more time, even though she has a full-time job.
And the scary thing about Red 3 is it's a pretty alarming dye. So back in
right.
Back in 1990, the FDA themselves, from a study from the 80s, where they fed Red 3 to rats, and the rats got tumors. So the FDA themselves stated that it caused cancer, and they banned it in cosmetics and externally applied drugs. But they had already permanently approved it in 1969 for food and ingested drugs. And so for 34 years, the FDA has been saying they're going to take steps to remove Red 3, and it's still allowed in food and ingested drugs.
Well, and you have to just wonder, why in the world are they putting dyes in a drug that you're swallowing? What is it getting people to buy the product more?
You're exactly right.
So
the only purpose of dyes is it's cosmetics. So they are basically makeup for our food and medications. And so we as Americans oftentimes like very beautiful, bright, vibrant, cohesive medications and foods. So it's used as a marketing piece. It doesn't help food stay stable longer. It has no purpose other than to make it look beautiful. And oftentimes dyes are used because a manufacturer has decided, instead of using strawberries, a real food, they've decided to use like a natural flavor or an artificial flavor, which is colorless. So if you have a protein powder where you have used an artificial flavor and it's colorless, but you want it to be a strawberry, you want it to look like strawberries. So to make it look like real strawberries, you add the color to make it look beautiful so that it looks like a strawberry, when they really could have used strawberries to begin with. But the reality is synthetic dyes are cheap. They are oftentimes a byproduct of petroleum, which compared a byproduct of petroleum, the price, to a real strawberry, like that's very different, but it's obviously at the cost of consumers. So
I think with medication, the one thing is that like they use it also as like an identifier for certain medications, but there's so many ways that you could do, they press pills, different shapes and things like that. And you could, there's ways that you could do it without coloring it. So yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. Well, your journey has led you to really learn a lot about this subject, not just for your son, but you have a greater purpose to share with other people. You touched on, you have a Facebook group, is that what it is?
We do, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your social media content that you have out there and how you're trying to reach people that way, because obviously one of the better ways to do that, right?
Yeah, so around the same time we decided to do the documentary, we wanted to start a group too, so we could go ahead and really start helping people who wanted to eliminate dyes. So we have really worked really hard to create resources and lists and just really make it easy for families who want to cut out something like synthetic dyes. And so for a lot of families, they've never even read an ingredients label. They've never looked at it. They've just bought food and eaten food. And so just thinking about a label and reading a label and finding dyes on a label can be challenging. So we've really created several resources. Like one of them that is really popular is we have a synthetic dyes list sheet. And so we've listed all the dyes. And if anybody's wondering, the 9 approved synthetic dyes used for food, cosmetics, and are a little bit different, but it's red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, blue 2, green 3, red 3, yellow 2, and orange B. And so we create the list. Oh, citrus red too? Yeah. And then we also say like why we should avoid them. So there's a number of reasons why you should avoid them. We also have a list of unexpected foods that you can find dyes in, and then like synthetic dye-free brands. I also, each holiday, I create lists that help families just enjoy, like Christmas, for example, dye-free, or Halloween dye-free. There's a lot of swaps that use natural dyes compared to the synthetic dyes. And so we really have tried to make it easy for families. We as humans are aware that dyes are not the only issue in our food system. But what we've noticed is that by cutting out synthetic dyes and by learning about synthetic dyes, it's almost like a gateway drug into like realizing like there are things in our food that we really should be avoiding. And so for me, as we went along this journey, one of the most shocking things, which it won't be shocking to you, but one of the most shocking things to me to discover is that synthetic dyes are a chemical. And when I heard that word chemical, I was like, oh, I didn't know there were chemicals in our food. And so once you get that information out there, people are really starting to just really be critical thinkers about what they're putting in their bodies. And so our group is Dye-Free Family Recipes, Resources,
Swaps.
Recipes, Resources, and Swaps.
Swaps,
And
recipes, and resources.
Swaps,
We'll-
Recipes, and Resources. There we go. Sorry.
Facebook.
We'll have
So, yeah.
links for that, and we'll have
Thank
links
you.
for your list, because I know our listeners are going to want to get that list.
Yeah, so that's our group. But then we also have a Facebook page for the film. So we've got about 40,000 people. No, we just broke 40,000. We just broke 40,000 people on our film's Facebook group. And on that one, we do some of the similar stuff. We share resources, but that's really, we post about the film, what's going on with the film, things that
Things that are happening in the news.
things that are happening in the news, things that we're learning about every day. Whitney was saying like that was her most surprising thing that she learned. My most surprising thing that I learned on this journey, even though it doesn't necessarily involve synthetic dyes, was learning about the GRAS list, the generally recognized as safe list, which is nuts. And so like she said, like learning about dyes is a gateway to other chemicals. Once you find out that there's thousands of chemicals that the FDA has never even looked at that are allowed to be in food because of this loophole, it's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to be aware of natural and artificial flavorings. They're all artificial. They're all fake. The things that our government is allowing is insane. I interviewed somebody from Europe, about a year ago, about chemicals in cosmetics. There's over 900 things that are banned in Europe that are approved in cosmetics in the United States because they're banned in Europe because they're carcinogens, and yet they're allowed to. It's I guess the bad side of capitalism.
You're right.
It's driven by money so strongly that there's people, in power that do not care about your son or your grandsons or grandchildren or you. They don't care whether you live or die, whether you get cancer or not. That's the sad reality. And until we face that fact, we don't take responsibility. And I think to me, that's what I always preach, is that you've got to take responsibility for your health. Nobody else is going to. Your doctor's not. The government's not. You have to take responsibility. And that means educating yourself. So, again, your documentary is To Die For, the documentary. We're going to have a whole bunch of information on that. Tell us when it's coming out.
So we don't have a concrete day yet. We have like a penciled in date, but it is going to come out January 2025. So the day that it comes out, we'll announce as soon as we have that locked in, but it will be out January 2025. And right now we're currently in the process of like an impact campaign. So we have a press release that just went out last week. And it's floating around the trades, like the film trades first. That's what we have a distributor now, and we'll announce who that is and stuff soon too. But so in about a week, we'll be able to send out our press release to different organizations and media outlets and stuff like that. So with our impact campaign, we're wanting to kind of partner with organizations, influencers, things like that, to do private screenings and use the film to kind of, as a education piece and get the word out there, spread the word out there, try to get it in front of as many politicians as we can, senators, state representatives, things like that. And hopefully we can go ahead and build some momentum before it releases in January. So
I did want to speak to what you said about Europe, and because something I found that was really interesting is Dr. Jim Stevenson. We interviewed him. He's a researcher responsible for the warning label in the EU. And I was asking him about the study. I was like, how did you get funding for this study? Because all the researchers we interviewed, they want to do further research on synthetic dyes in the U.S., which we have enough. There's 27 clinical trials on children in regards to hyperactivity, aggression, and things like that. So we really have enough, but they would be curious and would like to do more research, and they cannot find funding. They've applied and applied and applied. And so I asked Jim, I was like, how did you receive the funding? And he was like, oh, it's government funded. I was like, oh, the government was concerned about their citizens. And I think the reason why that is because they have some ownership in healthcare in Europe. And so they carry some of the burdens of healthcare. And as here in the US, we were paying for therapy. We were paying for doctor's visits. It was coming out of our pocket. So I thought that was interesting. I really think, we should have some organizations that step up and really reevaluate the chemicals that are in our food so that we know that they're safe, and so that we as citizens don't have to, look for these foods and see if they're safe or not. We just,
Well, also in Europe, the approval process is more of a, we need to prove that it's safe before it's allowed. Whereas here in America, it's more like, well, we're going to allow it until we prove that it's not safe. So
and
it's
in the case of Red 3, we've known since 1990, was the year before I was born, 34 years ago, that we know that it causes cancer. And it's still up until a few months ago, it was in Pediasure. It's in medications. It's in things that, the worst part is whenever it's in medications that children take daily. And so I think your audience would be interested to know that there's a few other things. Although our film focuses on dyes and behavior, but it also focuses on the cancer and how some of these dyes can be carcinogenic. And so we know that Rev 40 can increase your susceptibility to colitis. Yellow 5 and yellow 6 may contain carcinogenic components. Like, we know that. We've had a lot of allergic reactions with yellow 5, yellow 6, and Rev 40. So it's causing a lot of hives, throat swellings, things like that. We know that Red 3 and yellow 5 can be genotoxic, which can, cause DNA damage that can be passed from your child to their children, or from you to your child, or can cause, tumors. And so these are really dangerous chemicals. They look pretty and they look harmless, but they really are not good for us in any way.
Well, and I want to touch on some practical things too. Like some people might go, well, what am I supposed to do? I'm a single mom and I send my kids to school and they eat the school lunch because we get it at a discount or for free. What are some practical things that you would answer for somebody in that situation?
Truth is, that is an issue, and that's something we touch on in the film. The free and reduced lunch program. There are a lot of products in the free and reduced lunch program that contain dyes, and so we're pushing in our film for people to contact their state senators and state representatives. We've just seen a week and a half ago, 2 weeks, maybe 2 weeks ago, California became the first state to ban all the synthetic dyes in public schools. So by 2027 in California, synthetic dyes won't be allowed in the free and reduced lunch program. So we're hoping
so there are some good things coming out of California.
Yeah. Well, in California also is the only state so far that has banned Red 3. So they're a good starting point with dyes, and they're such a big part of the population that they can cause some ripple effect. And the fact that our manufacturer is going to continue to make the rest of the country with the dye in it and make a separate version for California. I don't know. So luckily California has done that, but we're hoping that will be a ripple effect. We hope that Georgia can be the second state to do it. That would be really cool. The second state to ban synthetic dyes. But
some practical.
I think the grassroots effort is so key. I mean, you didn't see anything in the organic space, 10 years ago. And just it's supply and demand. So people have got to stop buying this stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And so practically what you mentioned a single mom, and we actually interview a single mom in this film, and it is a struggle. But it's going to take a lot of time and effort for you, but you can figure it out. So our son, we normally pack his lunch, but on occasion we'll let him eat at school. And what we do is we call, I have a really good relationship with the lunchroom. And so I call the manager and I say, we're eating lunch today. Can you double check everything? And luckily for our school that we haven't found very many synthetic dyes, and we are a free and reduced lunch school. But I have seen letters from people in our group where the lunch staff will get back and be like, yeah, it's in our pizza sauce, it's in our fruit cups, it's in like really places that are surprising. And so it's really hard for children, especially if you are dependent on a school lunch, which oftentimes can be 70 to 80% of the food that a child consumes daily. They can't avoid it because there's not a label on their school lunch. And so they kind of have to eat what is given to them. So that is an issue, obviously.
Well, and on the flip side of that, to avoid it at all, you got to know that it's a thing, and it's generally not something that most people know.
Right.
And so for school parties have been an issue for us because, parents always want to celebrate birthdays at school. So what we do logistically is we make little mini cupcakes, and I let my son pick out what kind he wants, and we just make it a really fun treat, and we keep them in the freezer. So we treat it almost like a peanut allergy. We keep it in the freezer, and then whenever those surprise parties come, they just pull it out. So we send swap boxes, and we just try to think ahead of each holiday, special occasion, and we bring something that is a safer swap for us. So those are some of the logistics that you can do. It is difficult with the mom that we interviewed. What is difficult, the most difficult for her is the medication issue. And so her son does also have ADHD, and he does take medicine. And so when he went up from 1 milligram to 2 milligrams, the 2 milligrams had dyes, whereas the 1 milligram didn't. So it took her 2 weeks of back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and advocating to try to get insurance to cover 2 1 milligram pills so that he could take 2 milligrams instead of 1 milligram. And she also has to work with a compounding pharmacy. So it is difficult. And I do think that, it obviously should not be a medication. That's something we're really passionate about. And that's something that not a lot of advocacy groups are talking about, but it's something that we're really hoping that our film brings to light, and so that people can know that it's an issue.
Well, not to brush past school lunches too much. Like I do feel like it's kind of an unfortunate thing. Like she said, one, a lot of times people don't know that they need to be avoiding it, and two, if you're on the free and reduced, if you qualify for free and reduced lunch, like that's a big part of your nutrition, and it's like you need to eat the food. And so what we're hoping that we can inspire people to do when they're contacting their state representatives and things like that, like to really question, is it ethical to feed children something that is known to cause behavioral issues and hyperactivity,
DNA damage,
carcinogenic? Is it ethical to feed them these foods and then punish these kids for behavior issues in school? Like school is the one place you should be trying to avoid anything that could affect behavior negatively, like at all costs. So hopefully, and I think that's what's happened in California. Like, California is also where the WIHA report came from, which is the leading report on synthetic dyes that we have today. It was like a big meta study, like meta-analysis where they brought in all the studies.
Most comprehensive and rigorous undertaking to date on the relationship between synthetic dyes and its effect on children's behavior. 27 clinical trials underwent peer review, public comment. And so it's the most comprehensive report in the world. And so, it concludes a lot. It concludes all these things that us as parents have been saying for a while, that it causes, the conclusion was in some children, it can cause hyperactivity, inattentiveness, restlessness, sleeplessness, irritability, and aggression. And they also found that women and children that are in poverty, that they are consuming the most synthetic dyes, and they have the least access to, dye-free foods. And it also found that eliminating synthetic dyes is far more effective to treating ADHD than any other non-drug treatment for ADHD. So, it's very, I think that it's pretty sound, solidly backed by science, which very often doesn't happen whenever you're in like the crunchy world. It takes a long time for science to catch up, I feel like. So
Yeah. Actually, you're just bringing to light the science that has already been done.
You're right. You're exactly right.
I do want to touch on one other thing, because I think there's a lot of people out there that are going to make the mistake and think, well, I ate that when I was a kid, and I'm fine, but they have to look at the data because the same food that you ate when you were a kid, I don't know, let's say Cheerios or something like that. So you're giving it to your kids and giving it to your grandkids, did not contain the dyes and the artificial colors and the artificial flavors that it does today. Even though it looks the same, it tastes the same, it's not the same product. And there's a lot of data out there on so many processed foods that have changed because they're less expensive to make, putting different artificial flavors and artificial colors in them. So I think that has to be.
You're right.
Yeah, you're right. And you also have to look at that dye and like the way it affects people. It's kind of like the spectrum, right? So you have like, Dr. Stevenson's study pretty much showed that it does affect the general populations, but it's a spectrum. So you have kids in the normal area of the spectrum, and they consume synthetic dyes, and the effect it has on them you may not be able to notice a big change. So those kids don't seem like they're being affected. But then you have kids on the low end of the spectrum who are right at the edge of behavior issues and needing medication and things like that, where synthetic dyes can kind of push them into that. Or you have kids on the higher end of the spectrum where they're right at the edge of being exceptional or gifted, and these synthetic dyes are kind of pulling them back away. So
Yeah, our entire population. And to your point, the use of dyes have gone up dramatically since we were children. And so the 2 points I would make is that the use of dyes have gone up a lot. And then also, are we okay? Like the amount of friends I have that struggle with, they're tired, they're sleepless.
Yeah.
They are you aggravated? Are you struggling with anxiety and depression? Like there's a lot out there, and there's a lot of, millennials are struggling.
And there haven't been many studies on the effects of dyes in adults. It's mostly, but most of the studies have been on the effects of dyes in children.
And I can say that it affects me, and I did not know that it affected me until I went on an antibiotic that was red, and I was up the whole 10 days. I took it all night, just like could not sleep for days, and I could not figure it out. And then I finished up my round of antibiotics, which I thankfully have not taken an antibiotic in like 2 years now, which has been good for me. But there are adults that have claimed that they are affected by dyes. And then obviously, the cancer and the genotoxic and all of those things affect us as an adult as well.
Well, and I would argue, I have a video on our autoimmune course on neuroinflammation and microglial priming, that these chemicals, dyes and colorings and additives and things, are a major cause of dementia, Parkinson's, all these neurological disorders, from autoimmune issues to, early onset dementia, which is just like insanely growing. The Alzheimer's, and people are saying, well, it's because people are living longer. No, actually, our life expectancy has dropped, and the incidence of Alzheimer's is just going through the roof, and it's because of these neurotoxins. So, and from a neurological perspective, it is when your excitatory neurotransmitters, particularly glutamates in the brain, are near that excitatory threshold, anything can tip them over. So you talked about a spectrum, Brandon, and it's that spectrum. When you're closer to that threshold of firing, neurons are either they fire or they don't fire. But when your neurons are closer to that threshold of excitatory neurotransmitters firing, and you have that stimulation, it doesn't take much, like you noticed in your son, to cause behavioral issues. Well, maybe in adults, it's not so much the behavioral issues, but it's just things because you can temper it down with your choices as an adult, but it's causing neurological damage, that constant chronic inflammation that's causing neurological diseases. And
well, if you look back at like when they started to remove lead, like it's when they did things like that, because lead was affecting the brain and was affecting IQ and also that like they actually saw a drop in like crime rate and stuff. So
yes,
it's kind of a similar comparison. Like these little shifts in the the IQ and the population, they may seem small, but on a global scale, shifting the population
Massive.
any direction is not, especially in a negative direction, is not good. So,
Right. Well, now let's get to how we can help you, not just us in our clinic, but how anybody listening to this can help you get this information out.
Well, there's a few ways. We have been very fortunate that God's given us like a little army, like a little social media army. So you can join that army and you can help us spread awareness. You can share resources so that people know that there are options. And we would just want to help as many people as possible. You can join our email list. And when you join our email list, we update you on what's going on in the news. Like right now, there's a petition that's going on. So we are not us, but Food Babe, which is an influencer in the space, and she's an activist and an influencer, and she is petitioning Kellogg's to take out artificial dyes. So we update our audience on how they can help and be a part of the change. We also, on our website, we've just created a resources page where we have like social media templates that you can post and you can share your story and just engage your audience. But we also have letters that you can write to your school board, like letter templates, and letters that you can write to your state representatives to ask them to ban dyes in your state, in the schools in your state, or to ban dyes altogether, or to add a warning label, whatever your heart desires. But yeah, we really just want you to think about, one, sharing your story if you have a dye story, or just sharing that this can be an issue. At Taekwondo yesterday, our son takes Taekwondo, and I was talking to a mom, and they have a child that they're adopting that's just really, really struggling, and she had never heard of synthetic dyes. And so I was able to give her that I'm not sure if that will be, the golden ticket for him, but it could help. And so I just think people using their voice, using their stories, to share that these dyes are harmful. I think those are all really wonderful things.
Well, and I think that the success of the film is going to rely on like a word of mouth type, like a grassroots word of mouth.
Yeah, and I don't think that we talked about this, and that Brandon and we're two people, and we've created this documentary. Like we've not been paid by anybody. We have crowdfunded, but we've put a large amount of our savings into this because we're so passionate about it. And so like our audience knows that, and they have been fired up to get this information out. And so although we don't necessarily need the monetary support, like we really do need people to share and to spread the word, because the more people that we have on our social media, the more people that's talking about it, the more likely we can get this in the mainstream media, which I'm sure that is incredibly difficult.
What we're hoping for too is we're hoping that, it's very hard for us to connect to every organization that could find some use with our film. And it's very hard for us to connect with every single influencer that might be able to use this to help their audience or politician. So hopefully that we can have people help us with that. And, just let people know that this film exists. Anybody that you think could find a use for this film and use it as a resource to educate and to help change and help move this movement forward. We invite anybody to come to our pages and take our resources and send them out and get the word out about the film. So,
well, Brandon and Whitney, it's been a pleasure to have you. I'd like to have you back actually and hear more about this. I think to talk about this is key because it's grassroots that's going to grow this just like any other information. So we'll get information attached to this podcast about everything that we talked about. And these lists are so important. Your website is so important. Why don't you give that verbally again? Anyway, listen.
So our website is todieforthedocumentary.com.
And it's a DYE.
DYE, to die for DYE. And then if you want to go directly to, we actually have a list set up just for podcast listeners. So if you go to todieforthedocumentary.com/podcast, singular, not plural, then that'll take you to our podcast page and you can fill out. And then we can just kind of keep up with people that have found us through listening to podcast. Or if you just go to todieforthedocumentary.com, there's another sign up that puts you in our general newsletter as well. So,
well, thank you. We're going to be praying for you too, because I think you're up against opposition that isn't in favor of this. And
our God's a lot bigger.
God is bigger, and God's put this on your heart to be your mission, and I'm thankful for you guys.
Thank you so much.
We'll have you back. Thanks again.
We appreciate you.
Bye-bye.